Alessandro de' Medici, who you see here, is a fascinating figure in a lot of ways. He is the first one to be named the Duke of Florence, and as we've seen so far, the Medici have been vying for power, and ultimately, or most recently, I should say, the two Medici popes, first Leo X and then Clement VII, made sure that the Medici were able to return to power in Florence, and they ruled as sort of de facto rulers over the city while they reigned as popes. Alessandro de' Medici is named the Duke of Florence in 1532. He is the bastard child of Clement VII, the Pope, and an African slave. Evident in his portraits, and certainly contemporaries give us that information as well. They don't make a big deal out of it. It doesn't seem to cause much scandal, the question of his race. What does cause scandal is the fact that he was a bastard child. That is much more problematic in Renaissance culture than being mixed race. So here we see a portrait of Alessandro by Pontormo, an artist that I talked about in regards to mannerism. And really one thing that I think is really important about this mannerist style is that it coincides with this rule of the Medici, with the popes and then with the dukes of Florence. And then we'll see that it expands in form during the reigns of the Grand Dukes of Tuscany, which are part of the Medici family as well. So with Pontormo's portrait here, we can see some of the same characteristics that we saw in Pontormo's altarpieces. Lacking here, though, certainly is the presence of really bright clashing colors, but certainly you still have the small head and elongated body. And it's an interesting portrait because we see that he is actively sketching, and he's sketched ahead. And Alessandro, as previous Medici members likely did, is certainly well learned in the arts, and we know that he did actually practice sketching and painting. And in this, they're also trying to emulate the great emperors of the past, specifically Alexander the Great, who was known to have been an exceptional patron of the arts, and also an emperor that practiced painting as well. Here's another portrait of Alessandro de' Medici, labeled here above. And I think, you know, his mixed race heritage is made a little more evident in this image. It's a beautiful portrait, a really sensitive portrait that shows this man that was given an enormous task to rule over the city of Florence. And the naming of his position as the Duke of Florence really meant what appeared to be, anyway, the absolute end of the Republic. And so this was a big moment for Florence, and he had a lot on his plate, for sure. Alessandro uses art as a means of sending messages, just as his forebears had done, and commissions this sculpture by Baccio Bandinelli for the area in front of Palazzo Vecchio. In fact, it's on the other side of the door, the main door that goes into Palazzo Vecchio. It's on the other side of the door from Michelangelo's David. As we saw with Michelangelo's David, that was a sculpture that was produced during the time of the Republic and had those connotations of David representing the Republic, fighting off tyranny, which in that moment really meant the Medici. By placing a sculpture, this sculpture with this subject, Hercules in Cacus, the meaning of Michelangelo's David is transformed. It really becomes part of this larger program of sculpture, and that's developed with the next Medici rulers as well, that makes it so all of the sculpture is about the Medici and their beneficial role as protectors and defenders of Florence. So Michelangelo's David becomes, the figure of David becomes symbolic of the Medici and the tyrants that are represented as that sort of invisible enemy in that sculpture are any outside threats that have threatened the reign of the Medici, including, no doubt, those inside, those Florentines that weren't very happy about the end of the Republic. So these were important messages to send, and really, this reappropriation of subject matter and of sculptures that had been monuments to the Republic is an important part of what Alessandro does. The sculpture of Hercules and Cacus here, Hercules was one of the legendary founders of the city of Florence, and thus shows how Alessandro is appropriating a traditional Florentine symbol. Hercules, of course, the demigod representative of strength, here subdues Cacus, who was a tyrant, and Hercules is holding him by his locks of hair and has his club in the other hand. We get that complete submission of the figure through this placement of the two figures and the stance of Hercules, and he looks out at the viewer sort of beyond with this sense of determination. Certainly very bulky figures, and in that way we can see the connection Bandinelli is making with Michelangelo's treatment of the nude male figure, though arguably Bandinelli takes it to the next level and kind of overdoes the musculature, in fact even makes some of the muscle forms not look very natural at all. And in that way, he is stylistically in line with those Mannerist artists like Pontormo, who were rejecting the study of nature and instead looking at artistic sources like Michelangelo, or just sort of creating things in their own minds and then replicating them. You can see the different treatment of the male figure by this comparison. I have to say this, maybe not a completely fair comparison for Bandinelli's group, because as you can see, it's not in great shape. It's got quite a bit of discoloration, these dark areas from the pollution in Florence, so certainly is not as pristine and clean as Michelangelo's David is. Like Michelangelo, Bandinelli uses these very strong, pronounced facial features to communicate the same ideas about male virtue, that determination, those sort of leonine features, and those ideas about physiognomy, the inside character being represented in the facial features. I think you can see that really well here. Michelangelo, as I talked about, he found himself in a very bad situation when Alessandro was named Duke of Florence. In this interim period, after the sack of Rome, which we'll be talking about, and there's a momentary lapse in power for the Medici, and kind of weakens their position until about 1532, so for about 5 years, from 1527 with the sack to 1532. Michelangelo was working for the Republic. He was working on the fortresses for the Republic and certain war machine designs. And so as a result, when Alessandro was named Duke of Florence, Michelangelo is called out as being a supporter of the Republic, and Alessandro sentences him to death as being a traitor to the Medici and their dominion. Alessandro, however, his rule doesn't last very long. So I'll go back to his dates just so you can see that he reigns from 1532 to 1537, so only for 5 years. And his rule comes to an end in 1537 because his cousin, Lorenzino, kills him. Lorenzino assassinated Alessandro at the behest of certainly the Republican supporters in Florence, but also from this other line of the Medici family that questioned the legitimacy of Alessandro's reign since he was a bastard child, and they had their own designs on taking over the city of Florence for themselves. Michelangelo, in celebration of Lorenzino's assassination of Alessandro, makes this portrait bust of Brutus. Brutus is the man that had killed Julius Caesar, who was seen as taking too much power, and so Brutus, at the behest of the Senate, assassinates Julius Caesar. So the connections there were crystal clear. And this was really meant to honor Lorenzino for his bravery and to honor his role in getting rid of this dictator. A portrait done right in this same time period actually shows us a portrait of Maria Salviati. And she is with the daughter of Alessandro, Giulia de' Medici. Maria Salviati is the mother of Cosimo de' Medici, who will be the next ruler of Florence. And here he is. Cosimo was a young kid. He was about 17 years old when he was called by these men of power in Florence and asked to step in as the ruler. After the death of Alessandro, there were internal conflicts in the city, those that had supported Alessandro, those that were against him, and there was the idea that they would sort of institute a kind of government where there would be a figurehead, head of state, that wouldn't actually wield that much power, and then you would have this group of men, or as a senate or some other governing body that would help in the decision making. So there would be a bit more of a balance of power. They felt like Cosimo was the perfect guy for that because he was young. They thought he'd be easy to manipulate, and so they asked him to be this figurehead of the state and take over the title of Duke of Florence. Boy, did they misjudge Cosimo. Cosimo, though young, accepted this charge with great gravity. He studied all sorts of text about effective leadership, and he was keen to study Machiavelli's writings and really try to understand the best way that he could rule over the city with an absolute kind of power. So he had no inclination to have a governing body that would be part of the decision making in the city. And in fact, Cosimo very quickly makes that clear and does a number of things to really